Will you pray with me, please? God of silence and hope, God of peace and wholeness, God of this very moment and every breath in our lives, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you that we are together here with one another and with you. We thank you, God, that you have always been with us, that you have always, God, called us to be your lavender people, people of the color of dawn and dusk, people who stand between and on the bridge between day and night. And God, we thank you for this season of darkness, this time to be reminded that you are the author, the creator, and the finisher of the darkness and the light and all of creation, and you pronounced all of it good. So God, in this season of holy darkness, lead us into all that is glorious to be found in this time of year. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing to you and glorifying to your name. Amen. So Justin preached last week and introduced this series we are in, this series called A Holy Darkness. Just to revisit that a little bit, why enter into a holy darkness? Besides the fact that this time of year nature takes us into this darkness and that the days are growing shorter and the nights are growing longer, and that will hit its peak right at the winter solstice. This is a season of growing darkness before the light returns. The point of this sermon series is really to help us discover the goodness in the dark, to paint darkness in a more positive light, if you will. It's a time for us to embrace this mystery that light needs darkness as much as darkness needs light. It's a balance between the two, but in our world and in our society, we are often missing out on that balance. That in church and in our jobs and in our lives, unless we work the swing shift, we are often thrust into a full solar spirituality and a full solar light all the time. But think about what we miss if we live in that full solar state constantly. The beauty of the stars only is visible because of the darkness. Fireworks can only be seen at night when it finally gets dark. All of the phases of the moon, from the beautiful sliver of winter solstice all the way to the full supermoons that we have here sometimes. All those phases are beautiful because those phases exist. And those phases wouldn't exist without the darkness and the light. The truth is there are glorious, glorious things to be found in the dark. And what is true is something we don't hear very often, and that is this. Darkness does not equal evil. Darkness does not equal bad. But so often our culture and our language and our theology reflects the opposite. So this sermon series is to bring some balance to all of that, to reclaim the glorious good that is to be found in darkness. This week I've been spending a lot of time on the subject of caves. If there is ever a place where the beauty of mysterious darkness can be found, it's definitely in caves. And I learned this week that there are two kinds of caves. There are show caves. Show caves are places like Carlsbad Caverns. Anyone been to Carlsbad Caverns? Show caves are places like Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. Been to Mammoth? Those are what I call domesticated caves. You know, they have paved pathways and lighted paths and guides with plenty of light and all kinds of spotlights to show you a certain distance into the cave, but not too far. We get to see the domesticated part. The other kind of caves are called wild caves. Now, I have to tell you that wild caves are probably not for me because I'm a little bit claustrophobic, so I'm not going to be going into a wild cave anytime in the near future. But I do not deny that there are gloriously beautiful things to be found in the mysterious darkness of a wild cave. Just take a look at these pictures. That's a wild cave. So is that. See that guy climbing? That won't be me, ever. But wow, I wish I had that courage. Those are just a few pictures I found on the internet. There are thousands and thousands of them. And beneath the crust of this earth all over the place, there is a whole other world that is truly beautiful. Did you know that Christmas began in a cave? We say that Jesus was born in a manger, in a stable, because there was no room at the inn. And at least according to legend, if you go to the West Bank in the Middle East today, you can go and visit the Church of the Nativity, which is built over the place that is said to be the place where Jesus was born. The Church of the Nativity is built over a cave. And a cave is the spot, that cave is the spot that is believed to be where Jesus was born. Caves were often used as stables back in Jesus' day. They were safe from predators, there was no wind, they were well protected. And it was thought that Jesus was born in a cave. The shepherds that we heard about, that MJ read about this morning from the Gospel of Luke, they were directed by the angels to go and visit a cave. And if you read farther in Luke, it says that when the angels came to them and said, "Go and see this thing," that the shepherds went with haste to the cave. And let us not ever forget how much that decision cost them. It cost them a great deal. Shepherds were the lowest of the low, pretty much. Maybe one step above lepers in Jesus' day. Shepherds had nothing, they owned nothing. They were the guardians of the sheep of other people, which meant that their whole livelihood, maybe even their lives, depended on how well they tended those sheep. And Luke tells us they went with haste to the cave, meaning they left their sheep behind. Sheep don't herd real quickly. They had to leave their sheep behind and travel through the darkness of the night to get to the cave. They risked their entire livelihood and everything that gave them any kind of security or safety at all. They left it behind to go to the cave and visit the baby. And because they did, and because they went to that particular cave, they found something glorious there. Something that changed them forever. Something that sent them back to their sheep, praising God with great gratitude for all that they had seen in that cave. Barbara Brown Taylor, who wrote the book called Learning to Walk in the Dark, that we're quoting a lot from in this series. MJ read a passage from her as well. She found something glorious in a cave as well. In her book, she talks about how some good friends of her found out she was writing this book about reclaiming darkness. And her friends were expert cavers, wild cavers. And they invited her to come with them and explore a place called the Organ Cave in West Virginia. Now, the Organ Cave has a domesticated part, but it also has another entrance to the wild part, and that's what they invited her into. And she talks all about this experience and how really quite scary it was, but also how amazing. And they went deeply into this cave that is not domesticated, that's totally dark. And in 3 different places deep in this cave, they just sat in the dark. And it was so still and so silent that she said after a while she could hear the hum of her body. That the very organs in her body emitted a sound frequency that she could hear in that place. And in her experience in that cave, she came to the realization that all life begins in a cave. Jesus was born in a cave. Jesus was resurrected in a cave. The womb is a cave, completely enclosed in the dark. Justin talked about this last week, that it really takes a good 10 months in the cave of the womb for us to come out fully ready for the light. All life begins in a cave, she said. That darkness is essential for us to grow. But here's the thing that I realized in doing all this reading and everything about caves. Barbara Brown Taylor had a choice of whether or not to go to the cave. She had a choice to be a cave stranger, as MJ said in the reading. She temporarily became a cave dweller, at least for just a little while. The shepherds had the choice to go to the cave to see Jesus. And they decided to go. But what if you feel like you don't have a choice? What if it feels like you are forced to be a cave dweller? Is the darkness of the cave still as life-giving then? I ask this question because I believe that in this community and in our world, we are surrounded by people who are being forced to live in a cave. And I'm speaking specifically of those who are long-term survivors with HIV. Now, I know that there are all kinds of people in the world with AIDS. There are women and men, there are children, there are people all over the world. And today I want to specifically look at the folks in our community who are long-term survivors with HIV. I just continue to be stunned beyond belief that in 2016, we have people living with HIV, living with AIDS, who are suffering so greatly. Financial instability, often because of decisions they made 20 years ago when they just thought that death was imminent. Incredible isolation, ongoing physical struggles, and such aloneness with it all. And I asked myself, after 35 years, how is this possible that we can't do any better? How is it possible? And here's the answer. It's not possible, or we're in this situation because of stigma. Because of stigma. HIV may be a virus, but AIDS is a disease of shame. That's what it has been labeled. HIV and AIDS is the disease you get because of immorality. And even worse than that, because of sexual immorality. It's because maybe you're a sexual predator. It's maybe because you're a drug addict. It's the disease of Haitians. And the longer I live in Florida, the more I see how the label of Haitian is just about the lowest thing you can say about someone. They are seen as the unclean. People primarily see HIV as connected to sex. And because of that, it is unlike anything else. How many people do you know that don't want anyone to know they have cancer or diabetes? Maybe a few, but it's not at the epidemic level around HIV. It's nothing new. In Jesus' day, the unclean were people with leprosy. And guess where they lived? In caves. They were often forced to go and be completely apart from the rest of society and live by themselves in caves. And in fact, they would have to, whenever they ventured out from a cave, have to constantly shout out everywhere they went, "Unclean, unclean!" So people would know to get away from them as quickly as possible. Today, the lepers in our society don't have to shout unclean. We do it for them. We have labeled them unclean. Perhaps on a kinder, gentler note, I like to believe that it's not necessarily judgment like that in this church or in the LGBT community that makes us not deal with what's going on. Although I know the stigma is there as well. I just think that maybe we're just overwhelmed and don't know what to do. It's just easier to pretend it's not happening. Compassion is so much easier when people are dying in the moment, isn't it? Compassion just pours out of us so much more easily in a crisis. And we went through so many years of crisis. But when dying becomes a daily thing with chronic illness that goes on over decades, much like the rest of us who maybe aren't living with HIV, it's much, much harder to deal with, to find the answer, to know what to do. So I say all of this with really just a heart broken with frustration, because I truly have been here nearly 6 years, and I have never seen a situation like there is here in South Florida. I guess it's the luxury of coming from San Francisco, although if you come to the movie tomorrow night, you'll find out it's not so different there either. It's a horrible, horrible situation happening in our midst. And I know it's overwhelming. And I don't have the answer, but I have a hope that there might be an answer in something called the Twilight Zone. I'm not talking about Rod Serling's Twilight Zone. I'm talking about the Twilight Zone that Barbara Brown Taylor wrote of in that passage we heard. The Twilight Zone, she says, is that place right at the mouth of the cave, right on the outside of it and right on the inside of it. That's the Twilight Zone, and it's where cave strangers and cave dwellers meet. Some can go no farther out, she says, and some can go no farther in, but maybe we can meet right there in the Twilight Zone and come to see what is there and discover who we are in the presence of what we find together. Are you with me? Now the problem with this is I have to say something that I really don't want to say, which is this. If you are living with HIV, please come out. And I don't say that with any judgment, and I don't say it with any lightness whatsoever. I lost just about everything in this world that was ever important to me when I came out as lesbian. I know the cost. I know what it's like to leave all your sheep behind, to let go of your security, whatever safety you have, to risk it. I know. Many of us know. And yet we also know what changes have happened because we came out and said, no one will shame us for our sexual orientation. And my brothers and my sisters, nobody has a right to shame you for your HIV status. Nobody.
Amen.
It is a virus. It is not something that makes you bad. It doesn't matter how you got it. It doesn't matter. Nobody should be able to shame anyone because of their HIV status. And in this community, I've heard story after story after story of men who go to gay bars or who try to hook up on Grindr or go to the most respectable thing you can imagine, if you want to call it that, to try to meet other men who are terrified of disclosing their status because they know as soon as they do, if the person is HIV negative, that they're telling, they're going to run for the hills. This kind of stigma exists in our community. It exists in our workplaces. It exists in our families. It exists in school. And until people with HIV come out and say, I will not stand for this, it's going to be hard to get things to change. But I have to say this again. Please, I'm not asking this with judgment at all. And if it's not possible for you, I will love you no less. We all have things. Every one of us have things that it's difficult to come out of. It's why we're showing this film tomorrow night. It's why we're showing this film, so we can hear the stories of people who are living in this struggle, because it is stories that change people. It is people's truths and stories that change hearts and minds. Does it not? Why do we have marriage equality today? Right? But the rest of us, those of us who are HIV negative, we have the bigger responsibility to go to the cave. Go to the cave, where some people feel they are being forced to live because of their HIV status. We have to risk some sheep too. We've got to risk being associated with the stigma. We've got to risk being willing to proudly say, yes, we are the HIV church. Who will say that with me? Yes. We are the HIV church, and not be ashamed of it. We are the gay church, we're the queer church, we're the lesbian church, we're the straight church, we're the bi church, we're the transgender church, we are the people church, and we are the church with HIV. Amen. It was true 35 years ago, it is still true today, and we have to risk being associated with the stigma if we're going to break the stigma down. Can I get another amen on that? Amen. We have to risk being that church. We have to risk doing hard work again. Do you remember? I know not everyone here does, because not all of us are old enough. I'm just barely old enough. But I do remember the days of the tremendous amount of work it is to reach out and care for those in need who are dealing with chronic illness. We have to do that work again. And we have to risk the revival of grief. I know there's huge loss in this community. Loved ones, so many loved ones that we lost to AIDS. And to do this again, maybe this is why we run from it, because it's just too painful. And I think if we do that, maybe AIDS kills our loved ones once, but it's almost like we lose them over and over and over again the more we deny the needs of our brothers and sisters in our midst. The angels asked the shepherds to go to the cave to meet Jesus. And if we will risk to go to the cave to meet our brothers and sisters with HIV, guess who we're also going to meet? Jesus. Because that's who Jesus is. The vulnerable, the sick, the poor, the downtrodden, the oppressed. We know what it is like to be in that group. How often do we want people to come to this church and meet Jesus here? Amen. We too have to be willing to go to the cave to meet Jesus and to stand with those who are living with HIV. So our question is, will we be like the shepherds? Will we take the risk, whether we are HIV positive or HIV negative? Will we make haste to go to the cave where Jesus is born among us? I desperately hope we will. If you're not sure how to get to the cave, you can start to find it here tomorrow night. Whether you can come to the dinner or not, come to the movie at 7 o'clock and meet Jesus in the stories we will hear together. And let's sit in the dark together in this sanctuary and hear these stories. Let's sit together in the twilight zone where the cave dwellers and the cave strangers meet and discover who we are together in the presence of what we will find. Amen.